The United States government is now paying more than $1 trillion a year just to service its debt. Not to pay it off, just to cover the interest. That number crossed the $1 trillion threshold for the first time in history in 2025. And while you are watching this video, the national debt is growing by $70,000 every single second. $425 million every minute, $6.12 billion every day. The Federal Reserve has cut interest rates 6 times since September 2024. They've dropped rates by 1.75 percentage points. They told you it was about supporting the economy, about protecting jobs. They lied. What they're actually doing is trying to keep the U.S. government from drowning in its own debt payments. Because at current rates, interest on the debt has become the second largest line item in the entire federal budget. Bigger than Medicare, bigger than national defense, second only to Social Security. And here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit. This has happened before, not once, not twice. Over and over throughout history, the same pattern, the same stages, the same outcome. Empires rise, they borrow, they print, they collapse. Rome did it, Germany did it, Venezuela did it in our lifetime. Let me show you exactly where we stand, because these numbers are real. They're published by the U.S. Treasury, and they're worse than most people realize. As of December 2025, the total gross national debt of the United States is $38.4 trillion. That's not a projection. That's not an estimate. That's the actual number. 1 year ago, it was $36.2 trillion. 5 years ago, it was $27.4 trillion. The debt has increased by $11 trillion in just 5 years. Let me put that in perspective. The national debt now equals $112,181 for every man, woman, and child in America, and we're adding to that debt at a rate of $2.23 trillion per year. That works out to $6.12 billion per day, $255 million per hour, $4.25 million per minute, $70,843 per second. By the time you finish watching this video, the debt will have grown by tens of millions of dollars. But the debt itself isn't even the scariest part. The scariest part is what it costs to carry that debt. In fiscal year 2020, the United States paid $345 billion in net interest on the national debt. In fiscal year 2025, we paid $970 billion. That's nearly triple. In 5 years, our interest payments almost tripled. The Congressional Budget Office now confirms that actual spending on interest payments crossed $1 trillion for the first time in 2025. And they project it will hit $1.8 trillion by 2035. Think about what that means. Right now, 19 cents of every dollar the federal government collects in taxes goes straight to interest payments. Not to roads, not to schools, not to the military, just interest, just the cost of past borrowing. Interest on the debt is now the second largest expense in the entire federal budget. It exceeds Medicare spending. It exceeds defense spending. The only thing bigger is Social Security. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. In October 2020, the average interest rate on U.S. marketable debt was 1.58%. Today, it's 3.38%. That's more than double. The rate has more than doubled while the debt itself has grown by $11 trillion. Higher rates on a much larger debt equals an explosion in interest costs. The Federal Reserve knows this. They see the same numbers. That's why they've been cutting rates. In September 2024, they started with a 50 basis point cut, then 25 more in November, another 25 in December. They kept cutting through 2025. Since September 2024, they've cut rates by 1.75 percentage points. The Fed funds rate is now in the 3.5% to 3.75% range. They told you this was about economic stability, about preventing a recession, about supporting employment. But look at the math. If interest rates went back to their historical average of around 5% to 7%, the interest payments on $38 trillion in debt would consume virtually every dollar of tax revenue the government collects. The Fed isn't cutting rates to help you. They're cutting rates because the alternative is a debt spiral that crashes the entire system. They're choosing slow collapse over fast collapse, inflation over insolvency, the destruction of your purchasing power over the admission that the system is broken. And the debt to GDP ratio? It hit 100% at the end of fiscal year 2025. The United States now owes more than the entire economy produces in a year. The last time debt was this high relative to GDP was World War II. But back then, we were fighting for survival against fascism. Today, we're drowning in debt to fund transfer payments and interest on previous borrowing. This isn't sustainable. Everyone who looks at these numbers knows it isn't sustainable. The question isn't whether something breaks. The question is when. And what happens to your savings, your retirement, and your purchasing power when it does. What I'm about to show you is a pattern, a cycle that has repeated throughout human history. Different empires, different centuries, different continents, same outcome. Every major currency collapse follows 4 stages. Stage 1, discipline. A nation establishes a currency backed by something real, gold, silver, something that can't be created out of thin air. The government lives within its means. Citizens trust the money because it holds value. The economy grows on a solid foundation. Stage 2, temptation. Success breeds confidence. Confidence breeds borrowing. Wars need funding. Social programs expand. Politicians make promises. Deficits become normal. The central bank steps in as the buyer of last resort. Money creation accelerates, but everything still looks fine because growth masks the rot underneath. Stage 3, desperation. The debt becomes unsustainable. Interest payments devour tax revenue. The government faces an impossible choice: raise taxes and crush the economy, cut spending and face riots, print money and destroy the currency. They always choose to print. Every single time throughout history, they always choose to print. Stage 4, collapse, hyperinflation or default. The currency loses all credibility. Savings evaporate. The middle class gets wiped out. Social order fractures. The system resets through chaos, sometimes through war, always through the destruction of ordinary people's wealth. 4 stages: discipline, temptation, desperation, collapse. You might think this sounds theoretical, abstract, something that happens in textbooks but not in real life. Rome, the greatest empire the ancient world ever produced. At its peak, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia. 50 million people under one rule, unmatched military. Engineering that still stands 2,000 years later. Roads, aqueducts, and monuments that we still study today. And a currency, the denarius, that was trusted across 3 continents. Stage 1, discipline. The Roman denarius started as a coin of 95% pure silver, real money, real value. When a merchant in Gaul received a denarius, he knew it would hold the same purchasing power whether he spent it in Rome, Alexandria, or Londinium. The Roman economy thrived on this foundation. Trade flourished because people trusted the currency. Soldiers fought for it. Citizens saved it. The empire grew wealthy because the money was sound. Stage 2, temptation. Empires are expensive. Legions need paying. Frontiers need defending. Rome had thousands of miles of border to protect. Soldiers stationed from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates River. And emperors wanted monuments. The Colosseum wasn't cheap. Neither were the public baths, the temples, and the bread and circuses that kept the population satisfied. The costs exploded. Tax revenue couldn't keep up. So Rome did what every government does when spending exceeds income. They debased the currency. Emperor Nero started at around 60 AD. He reduced the silver content of the denarius from 95% to 90%. Not a huge change, barely noticeable, but it set a precedent. The next emperor shaved off a little more, then the next, then the next. By the reign of Marcus Aurelius in the late 2nd century, the denarius was down to 75% silver. By Septimius Severus, around 200 AD, it was 50%. The coins still looked the same. They still felt the same. But half the metal inside was now bronze. By the time you reach Emperor Gallienus in the 260s, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. 95% of the coin was base metal with a thin silver wash on the outside. It looked like money. It felt like money. But it wasn't money anymore. Stage 3. Desperation. Inflation spiraled out of control. Prices didn't just rise, they exploded. A measure of wheat that cost 8 drachmas in the 2nd century cost over 100 drachmas by the end of the 3rd century. That's more than a 1,000% increase. Merchants refused to accept the debased coins. Why trade real goods for fake silver? Soldiers demanded payment in food and supplies instead of worthless currency. The tax base collapsed because nobody wanted to hold money that lost value by the month. Emperor Diocletian tried to fix it with price controls. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD, setting legal limits on what merchants could charge for goods. It didn't work. Price controls never work. When you make it illegal to charge market prices, sellers stop selling. Goods disappear from markets. Trade moves underground or stops entirely. The Roman economy fractured into regional barter systems. The sophisticated commercial networks that had connected 3 continents broke down into local subsistence. Stage 4, collapse. The Western Roman Empire didn't fall because of barbarian invasions alone. The barbarians walked through a door that monetary collapse had already opened. When your currency is worthless, you can't pay soldiers. When you can't pay soldiers, you can't defend borders. When you can't defend borders, the empire fractures. By 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain. But the real collapse had happened decades earlier. The political fall was just the final symptom of an economic disease that had been spreading for 2 centuries. What followed was 500 years of decline. Trade collapsed, cities emptied, literacy plummeted. Engineering knowledge was lost. Historians call it the Dark Ages, and it started with currency debasement. The Romans didn't plan to destroy their empire. They just needed to fund one more war, pay one more legion, build one more monument. The debasement was always temporary, always necessary, always just this once, until the currency was worthless and the empire was gone. Same pattern. 4 stages. An empire that dominated the known world for centuries, brought down by the same monetary mistakes we're making today. Germany, 1920s. You've seen the photographs. Wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Children stacking worthless banknotes like building blocks. People burning money for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. But do you know how it happened? Stage 1. Before World War I, Germany had a disciplined monetary system. The Reichsmark was backed by gold. Germany was an industrial powerhouse with a thriving middle class. Stage 2. The war destroyed everything. Germany borrowed heavily to fund the fighting. They printed money. They promised victory would pay for it all, but they lost. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks in reparations. The entire German GDP was only 12 billion marks per year. Impossible math. So, the Weimar government printed. Slowly at first, then faster, then exponentially. Stage 3 hit fast. In 1921, $1 bought 75 marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. Trillion, in less than 3 years. Prices doubled every few days. Workers got paid twice daily because money lost value faster than they could spend it. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Life savings became worthless overnight. A comfortable retirement nest egg couldn't buy a single meal. The wealthy survived. They held land, factories, gold. Inflation destroys cash. It doesn't destroy assets. The middle class was annihilated. Stage 4. Political chaos followed economic chaos. A desperate, humiliated population looked for someone to blame. Someone promising simple solutions. Hitler rose to power on the back of that devastation. Weimar hyperinflation didn't just destroy wealth, it destroyed democracy. It led directly to World War II and 60 million deaths. Monetary collapse doesn't just hurt your bank account, it tears apart the social fabric. It creates conditions for extremism and war. Same pattern, different century, same outcome. This one happened while you were scrolling social media, while mainstream media barely covered it. 20 years ago, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. Not one of the richest. The richest. Stage 1. Massive oil reserves, larger than Saudi Arabia, a strong middle class, modern cities, functioning hospitals, a stable currency called the bolivar. Stage 2. Socialist policies expanded rapidly under Hugo Chavez. Price controls, nationalization of industries, free housing, free healthcare, subsidized everything, all funded by oil revenue. And for a while it worked. Oil prices were high. Money poured in. But when you nationalize industries and punish production, output collapses. Venezuelan oil production fell from 3.5 million barrels per day in 1998 to 300,000 by 2020, a 90% collapse. Venezuela. Then oil prices crashed in 2014. The whole facade crumbled. Stage 3. The government printed believers, massive quantities. Inflation hit 300% in 2017, then 1 million percent in 2018. Prices doubled every 18 days. Grocery stores emptied. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Cancer patients couldn't get chemotherapy. Diabetics couldn't get insulin. People lost an average of 24 pounds, not from dieting, from hunger. In one of the most resource-rich countries on earth. Stage 4. Over 7 million people fled. Families walked across borders carrying whatever they could. A prosperous nation reduced to a humanitarian crisis in under a decade. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a natural disaster. Venezuela has more oil than almost any country on earth. This was monetary collapse, currency destruction, government printing its way to poverty. Same pattern. Our lifetime. Same outcome. 3 examples. 3 centuries. 3 continents. Same 4 stages. Same ending. The United States used to have stage 1 discipline. The Bretton Woods system made the dollar the global reserve currency in 1944. Every other currency pegged to the dollar pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign nations could exchange dollars for physical gold. Real accountability, real limits. The Fed couldn't print unlimited dollars because France or Germany could show up and demand gold in exchange. That system died on August 15, 1971. President Nixon went on television and announced the U.S. would no longer convert dollars to gold. We'd printed too many dollars. Funded Vietnam, funded the Great Society. France started demanding gold for dollars. Other nations followed. Nixon knew Fort Knox would be empty within months, so he closed the window. No more gold backing. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but government promises. That was the end of stage 1. Stage 2 accelerated after 2008. The Fed responded to the financial crisis with unprecedented money printing, quantitative easing, QE1, QE2, QE3. The Fed's balance sheet went from $800 billion to $4.5 trillion. Then COVID hit and they went nuclear. $3 trillion printed in 3 months. The Fed's balance sheet exploded to $9 trillion. Congress added $6 trillion in stimulus. Total COVID response exceeded what we spent in decades of previous crises combined. By mid-2022, inflation hit 9.1%, highest in 40 years. Your paycheck bought less, your savings bought less. Stage 3 now. $38 trillion in debt, $1 trillion in annual interest payments, debt to GDP at 100%. The Fed cutting rates, not to help you, but to keep the government solvent. The math doesn't lie. We're deep in stage 3, and the world is watching. Here's what most Americans don't realize. The rest of the world sees what's happening, and they're responding. The US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen to 57.4%. The lowest since 1994, down from 72% in 2001. That decline is accelerating. Central banks worldwide are dumping dollars and buying gold at a pace not seen in modern history. Over 1,000 metric tons purchased annually in 2022, 2023, and 2024. 3 consecutive years. The longest sustained buying streak ever recorded. China has reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings from $1.3 trillion in 2013 to $730 billion in 2025, a 45% reduction. Meanwhile, they've been buying gold for 11 consecutive months. BRICS nations now hold over 6,000 tons of gold combined. Russia leads with 2,336 tons. China holds 2,298 tons. They're not just stockpiling, they're building alternative financial systems. BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment system designed to bypass Western-controlled financial rails, the unit. A pilot currency backed 40% by physical gold. A new precious metals exchange where members trade gold without using dollars. Russia and China now settle almost all bilateral trade in yuan and rubles, not dollars. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. The petrodollar system that has underpinned dollar dominance since the 1970s is fracturing in real time. The World Gold Council surveyed central bankers in 2025. 73% believe the dollar's share of global reserves will decrease over the next 5 years. 95% expect central bank gold holdings to increase. When foreign nations stop buying our debt, when they stop accepting dollars for real goods, the Fed becomes the only buyer left for U.S. Treasuries. That's the definition of monetizing the debt. That's the path to hyperinflation. There are only 2 ways this ends. Hyperinflation or default. That's it. Those are the options. Hyperinflation means the Fed keeps printing, keeps monetizing debt, keeps cutting rates even as inflation resurges. They'll call it something else. Quantitative easing, emergency liquidity support, economic stabilization. But the result is the same. Prices spiral. 10% inflation becomes 20, then 50, then 100. Your salary stays flat while everything costs more. Your savings don't get confiscated. They just stop buying anything. A gallon of milk that costs $4 today costs $40, then $400. It sounds absurd until you remember it already happened. Germany, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Argentina, dozens of countries throughout history. Default means the government admits it can't pay. Bond markets collapse overnight. Interest rates spike to 20% or higher. Credit freezes. Banks fail by the hundreds. FDIC insures about $9 trillion in deposits. They hold roughly $100 billion in reserves. Do the math. Social Security checks stop. Medicare payments stop. Government services stop. Which one will they choose? History gives us the answer. Governments always choose hyperinflation. Always. 100% of the time. Default is immediate political suicide. You admit failure. You face consequences. Hyperinflation lets you blame someone else, corporations, foreign adversaries, speculators. You can pretend it's not your fault while the printing press runs. But here's what most people miss. Both outcomes destroy the middle class. Both outcomes concentrate wealth at the top. In hyperinflation, people holding real assets win. Real estate, gold, commodities. People holding cash get destroyed. The middle class always holds cash. The wealthy always hold assets. Same outcome, different path. Your savings disappear either way. I know what you're thinking. I can hear the objections forming right now. This time is different. That's what they always say. Every single time, the Romans thought their empire would last forever. Germans thought they were too civilized for hyperinflation. Venezuelans thought they were too rich to collapse. The details change, the technology changes, the pattern never changes. The dollar is the global reserve currency, for now. That status isn't permanent. It's a privilege granted by the rest of the world. A privilege that's eroding in real time, down from 72% of reserves in 2001 to 57% today. At this pace, it falls below 50% within a decade. When that privilege ends, we can't import oil. We can't import electronics. We can't import goods. We've been exporting dollars and importing products for decades. When countries stop accepting our currency, shortages follow immediately. America is too powerful, too innovative. Venezuela had more oil than Saudi Arabia. Rome had the most advanced military of its era. Germany was an industrial titan. Power doesn't protect you from monetary collapse. Innovation doesn't pay off $38 trillion in debt. Technology will save us. AI will boost growth. Technology doesn't change human behavior. It doesn't change government incentives. It doesn't fix the math of unsustainable debt. AI won't reduce the deficit. Quantum computing won't stop the Fed from printing. They won't let it collapse. Who's they? The same people who said inflation was transitory? The same people who printed $9 trillion and promised no consequences? They don't control this anymore. The debt controls it. The math controls it. Every excuse is just denial wrapped in hope. And hope is not a strategy. So what do? How do you prepare for something this big? First, understand the game. This isn't about predicting the exact date of collapse. Nobody can do that. It might take 2 years, it might take 10, but the direction is clear. Position yourself accordingly. Second, protect your purchasing power. Don't hold all your wealth in dollars. You need dollars for daily life, for emergencies, for transactions, but pure cash savings will get destroyed by inflation. That's already happening. Diversify into hard assets, real estate with real utility, not luxury condos in overheated markets, productive land, rental properties with strong fundamentals. Physical property can't be printed into existence. Commodities, gold, silver, things with real demand that hold value when currency doesn't. Gold has been money for 5,000 years. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. Gold hasn't. Equity in productive businesses, companies that produce real goods and services, companies with pricing power that can raise prices as inflation rises, foreign assets, Swiss francs, Singapore dollars, currencies backed by more responsible fiscal policy. Not perfect, but diversification reduces concentration risk. Third, increase your skills. Skills are inflation-proof. Nobody can devalue your knowledge. Learn practical things, how to fix, how to build, how to create value. When systems break down, practical skills become more valuable than credentials. Fourth, build community. When systems fail, isolated individuals struggle. Connected communities survive. Know your neighbors, build networks. Real relationships matter more than followers. You can't control what the Fed does. You can't control what Congress spends, but you can control your own preparation. The time to act is before the crisis, not during. Let me be clear about what I've shown you today. $38 trillion in debt, $1 trillion in annual interest payments, a currency losing reserve status in real time, central banks worldwide dumping dollars and hoarding gold. Rome followed this pattern. Weimar Germany followed this pattern. Venezuela followed this pattern. The United States is following this pattern right now. This isn't fear-mongering. This is math. This is history. This is what happens when governments spend more than they have and print money to cover the difference. The question isn't whether the system breaks. The question is whether you'll be prepared when it does. Most people won't prepare. Most people will trust the experts. The same experts who said inflation was transitory. The same experts who said the housing market was fine in 2007. The same experts who have been wrong at every major turning point. You don't have to be most people. The information is there. The pattern is clear. The data is public. What you do with it is up to you. I'll keep covering this. I'll keep showing you the numbers as they develop. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Because what comes next is going to matter more than anything that came before. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next one.